and boring. My name is Ryan Sadkoviak. It is the last day of March. Well, I guess by the time you guys listen to this, it'll be the first day of April. But 1 month closer to the college football season, Clinton. Sir, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good, Ryan. I am feeling pretty sore. I hit legs pretty hard yesterday, to the fact that now every time I stand up, my calves are so tight I cannot dorsiflex to neutral, and I walk like I'm 90 because my knees are bent. If you ever remember the Maddens from like the early 2000s, how all the
Mm-hmm.
players walked around like their knees were bent, that's been me all day today. My boss said, "Dude, are you injured?" I was like, "Nope, just extremely sore." I am 33 years old, or almost 33, and I can't move anymore. Other than that, like I told you pre-show, guys, if I disappear tonight, it's because my 2-year-old climbed out of his crib and I had to go put him back. So Ryan will just keep on trucking without me. Otherwise, Mr. Ryan, how are you?
Speaking of old, I spasmed my back tying my shoes today. So that's kind of where we're at.
30s, man.
What did my buddy sent me a tweet? It was fuck, I gotta find it now. It was like some embarrassing injury thing that happened, and I'm like, honestly, I feel it because I literally injured my back tying my shoe. Oh, Freddie Freeman tweaked his surgically repaired ankle while entering the shower. Who among us?
Oh my God, poor Freddie Freeman.
That's not
He's
the craziest thing I've ever
probably
heard.
right around the age we are too.
Yeah,
I would
you know what?
assume.
You have the audacity to move, and your body's like, nope, not today.
Not today, son. Mine
I
was like,
mean,
"Why did you do that many calf raises, dumbass?"
it probably doesn't help that I sit like the Hunchback of Notre Dame for 80% of my day. Just
Wasn't this a topic when you were working at Orthopedic One with Dean Ryan?
probably. Yeah, he'd walk up by me and he'd just like push me right in the middle of the spine and be like, "Sit up straight." And I'm like, "Shut the fuck up, Dean. I know you're right, but I'm
Uh,
comfortable."
I have noticed more low back soreness having a student that he's when he's doing most of my stuff. I'm just like, oh man, I'm a little more achy now when I stand up. I have to move around for 5 minutes before I'm not stiff. Freeman's 35 years old, by the way. He's got us by a couple years.
Oh boy, not not giving me something to look forward to the next couple of years.
I know, right? It's all downhill from here, or technically all uphill from here.
I
I think
mean,
the saying should be.
realistically, we are never closer to death than we are at this current moment in time. There's
I
some food
mean,
for thought.
most men in my life are gone by 70, so in 2 years, Ryan, I'll be 50% of my life
Uh,
over.
I could only be so fortunate.
I'm trying to set a new gene pool here, but who knows if that'll happen.
Genes are undefeated, man.
That's right. Father Time. All right, guys. Well, welcome back to the show tonight. We are going to discuss Penn State and Maryland. Unfortunately, our guy Matt Flip could not make it on this week with us. He is traveling, but we promise we will get him back on sometime in the future to get a little bit of his insight. Maybe we can peg him for a little fun May or June chat prior to our fall previews coming again in July. But as we said tonight, we'll be Penn State and Maryland. If you are watching us live, you are, of course, on the YouTube channel. So if you're there, go ahead and press the like button and hit subscribe so you never miss a minute of the action. If you are listening to the audio version, you can check us out on YouTube at ITP CFB. If you prefer the audio version, you can find us on your preferred podcast
Pod
platform.
class?
Yeah, podcast. And then if you'd like to follow us on the socials, we are on Twitter/X and Instagram, ITPCFB. We will have more clips coming now that we have 2 episodes a week. So we'll finally have some more footage to post out on the old Instagram. Although our little Purdue clip I posted did get a little bit of love. So I was a little surprised by that. So we are going to start. Well, Ryan, do you have anything to add before we kick off into our next spring preview?
Um, I'm excited to talk about Penn State? Question mark.
I mean, this was your preseason darling that we have talked about. So let's start off with the Penn State Nittany Lions. Knock out two of the biggest hires. Jim Knowles, of course, the defensive coordinator, taken from arch nemesis, the Ohio State Buckeyes. And then another former Ohio State coach, Stan Drayton, was pulled in to be running backs coach for Penn State after Ryan, fill me in, Notre Dame stole
Jaywan Sider.
Jay Sider from Penn State to be their running back coach. So, Ryan, any general thoughts? You can go first on Stan Drayton, but I know you're going to have some thoughts on Jim Knowles.
Um, I like don't enjoy commenting. Like the funniest thing I think that exists in message board culture is like people who bitch and moan about support staff hires. Like that guy's a bum. Why did we hire that guy when we could have hired this guy? As if anybody outside of like hardcore football nerds or football reporters has any clue about anything from a position coach standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't tell you if a guy was a good position coach or not. I have no
Drayton will,
idea. I'm not
Drayton
in
will
the
be good.
room. I'm not in the room. I don't know.
It's also hard to swing and miss when you have Kayton Allen and Nicholas Singleton.
Well, no, right. Like he's got a pretty nice job this year. He's walking into a pretty good situation. I think maybe I saw this wrong. I think they only signed him to a 1-year contract. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Or maybe that was reported initially and then refuted, but I saw at one point that it was rumored that he only signed a 1-year contract, which I thought was interesting. Again, that could be wrong, but
And then on Jim Knowles, now that we've had some months to process this, we touched on it a little bit either end of July or early February, whenever we did our filler episodes. We got to touch on Mr. Knowles. Your thoughts on the hiring of Jim Knowles, Ryan?
well, it's just such a fascinating fit because he's walking into a situation where it's been really good, right? Like there's no defense that needs to be fixed here. Like when he went to Ohio State 3 years ago, like that was a bad defense that he was having to reboot. Like that was a defense that was legitimately holding them back from being a legitimate national title contender. And he did well revamping it. It didn't happen overnight, right? It was consistently getting better year by year by year. And I mean, year two they were really freaking good. That was a really freaking good defense in year two. And I mean, just completely lights out this year. But also, the ammunition he had to work with was otherworldly at all three levels, playmakers at all three levels. And coming from Penn State, I mean, it's been the opposite. Their last two defensive coordinators have been excellent. You know, Manny Diaz is a head coach in the ACC right now, and Tom Allen is defensive coordinator at Clemson. Like, you could say what you want about is that a lateral move or not. I mean, I know he made that for family reasons, but that's still a premier position that he moved on to. So he's not having to come in and reinvent the wheel or anything like that. Like he has a pretty good core. I know they're replacing a couple of guys on the defensive side of the ball, but there's a lot of ammunition coming back. I'm fascinated to see how I don't know how you would characterize a more aggressive style of defense plays there. I mean, you're more familiar with what he likes to call than I am.
Sorry, I was currently watching as my toddler neared the edge of his crib. I thought I was going to have to yell in his monitor to sit down.
The compelling
Anyway,
television. That'd be compelling radio.
yeah. So for Knowles, I think the biggest thing that I watched at Ohio State after learning about him from Oklahoma State and in Duke was he's a safety-driven defense. And the jack position, right? The jack position that was never really utilized, never came to fruition with Ohio State. You heard about it year after year, like, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. We're going to do it. And they did it against Purdue this year and never really saw much more of it. So I guess coming in with all the studs that he has returning, you have Danny Denai Sutton, who had 8.5 sacks in 2024, I believe was second on the team. You get stud Zakee Wheatley back, who was third in tackles on the team with 96. You lost Kevin Winston or KJ Winston Jr., but you lost them all of last year, so Knowles really wouldn't have a chance to have them anyways. But you got the star safety that you need to start with. He's certainly, again, I'm not comparing apples to apples here. He's not Caleb Downs. I know a lot of players certainly aren't. But the cupboard is not bare. Knowles, I'm interested to see, the first year at Ohio State was really aggressive, right? And then the second year he was there, they kind of backed off and were a little more conservative. And then this year you kind of found that happy medium in a sense, right? But they also kind of freed up some stuff on the D-line. So I feel like if Franklin just lets Knowles do his thing, it's going to maybe look a little more like Oklahoma State, where they utilize the jack position while maintaining kind of a three safety look and being safety dominant there. But you're right. He's walking into a fantastic situation off a defense that is pretty elite every year. He's not going to have to rework anything, maybe retool a few things here or there. We are losing key loss number one, Abdul Carter, 68 tackles, 24 TFLs that led the conference last year, and 12 sacks. So that's a big guy to replace. You're also losing your top linebacker tackler in Kobe King, 97 tackles, 9 TFLs, 3 sacks, and another leading tackler and safety, Jalen Reed, who had 98 tackles and led the team there. So he's got some pieces to replace, but Penn State does a good job recruiting. Matt Flip has talked to us about that. I think they're just going to kind of you're just reloading. Reload the clip, as Ohio State utilized their mantra last year. But I think Knowles, you mentioned it before, it takes time to install the defense fully. And for a team that everything hinges on this year, it feels like they were just celebrating what they get the number one receiver in the 2027 class. Well, Drew Allar's not there, and that's 2 years away, right? Like, everything hinges on this year. So how quick does that defense settle in? How much of Knowles' scheme can he utilize in this first season with Penn State, I think, will be key.
The other part, so they're going to be the most interesting team for me to talk about in 2025. I mean, we talked about them a lot last summer too, and I think the tenor of the conversation with them is a little different in the sense of last year it was kind of like, look, I need to see it before I'm going to start buying it. Like every year it seems, Penn State's going to take that next step forward. Penn State's going to take that next step forward. And they're a good team. And Flip's mentioned this to us numerous times that, James Franklin gets an unfair rap for not coaching up to his talent or whatever. And in fact, it's actually the opposite. Like they're consistently outperforming what their recruiting rankings is. If anything, the knock on James Franklin should be, why are you not consistently signing top 10 classes at a program like Penn State with the resources available to you? And I don't know that anything that happened in 2024 for Penn State was going to be enough to sway the haters' minds, if that makes sense, right? Like, I think reasonable people can sit and look and say, sure, Penn State probably got a little bit of a gift with their first 2 rounds playoff games last year, but they still won those games. They were a Drew Allar brain dead interception away from potentially winning the Orange Bowl and rematching Ohio State for a national title. They didn't exactly get their doors blown off by Ohio State in the regular season, as pitiful as the offense looked in that game at times. And they held tough with Oregon too. So like even though you're looking at like the overall of Penn State in 2024 is, they played for a Big Ten title, but they didn't win the Big Ten. They made a playoff run, but they didn't really beat a name brand program to get there. Like you can nitpick and detract, but full stop, that was a big step forward for James Franklin. Like getting back to the Big Ten title game, winning a couple of big, meaningful postseason games. That's how you build momentum into a season like this. The issue with that now is you've given the fan base a taste of what that success feels like, and you've continued to build up that momentum in the offseason with the Knowles hiring and in the announcement of all these players who've been coming back. So now you've set 2025 up as kind of this high watermark for your program. Like expectations are high, and I don't know that this has been a position or a tier or a stratosphere that Penn State has occupied in the James Franklin era. We're coming into a season, the expectations are as high as they are. There's certainly been expectations. I think going into last year it was playoff or bust, and well, mission accomplished with that. Now to build off of what you did last year, like you have to make the national title game or else it will have been a step back. And everything's contextual, right? Like looking at a team like Notre Dame, for example, they're not going to win the national title this year. I think they lost too much off of last year's team, and this is not to bogart the conversation to make it about Notre Dame, but like there's tiers to this. It's all contextual. Like you lose a lot from your team, even though you made a deep run. Like Ohio State too, for example. Like I don't think you're going to be sitting here saying Ohio State needs to win a national title this year, because it's just going to be hard to do that with what that team lost. But in Penn State's position, it's kind of like Michigan after they lost to TCU. Like, you had a great year last year, but you brought everyone back. If it's not going to happen for you this year, when is it going to happen? And for Penn State, that's what it kind of feels like this year.
I mean, it's in a sense, it's natty or bust, right? It's the same thing that you felt like Michigan was in 23, and certainly the pressure. I mean, all of Ohio State's players said it last year, natty or bust. We all came back to win the national championship, and along the way get some other things that they didn't get. But Simply going to the Big Ten championship game and winning and then losing in the first round of the playoff, a la Oregon, is not acceptable for this Penn State team this year. They have too much on the line. They've brought too much back. There's so many expectations. So, as you mentioned, this is kind of a new stratosphere for them. How do they handle that? You you are essentially, I mean, I don't think anyone's going to sit here, not shouldn't say anyone. Most people aren't going to sit here and say Penn State over Ohio State in initial Big Ten rankings. I wouldn't think. I think Ohio State carries that because of the Natty. Maybe Oregon's a step above them because of the Big Ten championship, but you were right there on that line with them. The expectations are very high. James Franklin, find your way in a game in which you are talent equated to win, because you beat everybody below you. Now you got to beat somebody as good or better than you a little more consistently. And that game in Columbus looms pretty large, and I believe they host Oregon this year.
Yeah,
So,
that's can we talk about this gift of a schedule that they got?
absolutely.
Their non-conference schedule is laughable. Like full on non-competitive non-conference schedule. So you play 3 cupcakes, you have a bye before you get Oregon. Like that is an Ohio State 2024 schedule. That is literally the Ohio State 2024 schedule.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, the damn Oregon game is a whiteout.
It
It'll
won't
be in
be.
Fox. It'll
It's
be
not
this weekend.
it's not
Yeah.
going to be. It's not
We don't
going to
even
be.
need to get our hopes up. Sorry, Penn State fans. We know Fox.
So so you get the Oregon game. Kind of tricky the next week having to go across the country to UCLA, but your 3 games after Oregon are UCLA, Northwestern, and Iowa before another bye before you go to Ohio State. So you have a bye week before your 2 biggest games of the season. What a gift from the Big Ten. I think the interesting thing about this Penn State schedule is you have Indiana on here. So on the surface, that appears to be a tough game, but we'll see what Indiana is in 2025. But you finish off at Michigan State, Nebraska, and at Rutgers. This isn't outside of those 2 marquee games and maybe Indiana, like there's not a lot of meat on this schedule bone here, Clinton. If Penn State goes 10-2 losing to Oregon and Ohio State, are they on the outside looking into the playoff? That feels kind of Miami-ish. Maybe not that bad of a schedule, but there's no like if Indiana takes a step back and finishes like 7-5, 8-4, like that's not going to be a big ranked marquee win. I mean, I certainly don't see UCLA or Northwestern or Michigan State or Rutgers taking a gigantic step forward this year. Maybe Nebraska, maybe Iowa can, but just on the surface, outside of those 3 games, it's like 2.5 big games. If you lose 2 of them, I mean, that's not a great position to be in.
Well, you mentioned the two, right? You're expecting Oregon and Ohio State to be playoff teams. You lose to them both, you've already shown you can't beat a playoff caliber team. Now, can they still get in? Certainly. I think the Big Ten carries enough to help Penn State get over that hurdle, but I don't think you're too far off in the potential Miami thought of that if it's close, you might get left out and you're sitting at home. You know, Miami choked it away at the end of the year. All you had to do was win one more and go to your conference championship, and you're probably in. And if Penn State misses those two, they're not getting to the Big Ten championship.
I just want to add that's strictly a hypothetical. That's not my prediction. Please don't yell at me.
No, I think I'm excited when we do get to the predictions down the road, because I also expect a lot out of this Penn State team. And the biggest question, I feel like, are there any solutions at wide receiver, Ryan? We've talked about this. You and I feel like, talked about this before we even did this podcast. Is Penn State and wide receivers. You have a very capable quarterback in Drew Allar, who I think we all expect to take the next step this year. I believe they're returning most of, if not all, of their offensive line. You bring back your 2 running backs in Singleton and Allen. You do lose Pabula, gone to Mizzou, so you are going to have Grunkmeyer is likely the backup, got a little experience last year, but you don't kind of have that safety net with Pabula there anymore. So the solution's a wide receiver, Ryan. I mean, you lost Harrison Wallace and Amari Evans, Ole Miss and Washington. They were your second and third leading receivers last year. There's still no true number one. So your thoughts kind of on the additions that they're bringing in, or that they're bringing back on the team, not just through the portal.
Well, I think with this wide receiver room, I would like it a fair amount more if you still had Evans and Wallace, because then you're adding on top of guys who were fine last year. They're perfectly fine. They're certainly not number one receivers, but they're guys that can help you. The issue is you lose those two guys, and even though you bring in two good players in the portal, like what's the math on that? I don't know how the calculus exactly is going to work out on that, because it feels to me you're kind of in a pretty similar position. I like Kyron Hudson as a receiver. He was good last year. The numbers aren't necessarily eye popping, but that was a pretty stacked receiver room at USC, which ironically is now all gone.
Shambles.
All gone. But the Devontae Ross ad is interesting because Penn State's done that thing before where they get a highly touted G5 receiver. I can't remember the kid's name from Penn State, Cephas. What, Dante Cephas maybe?
Dante Cephas, yes.
And he did not a lick for them. And
Shit.
there's a former Troy Trojan wide receiver who had a pretty decent Big Ten career. You might remember his name, Tez Johnson. And Devontae Ross isn't a whole lot bigger than Tez Johnson. He's listed 5'11", 161. What did Tez Johnson weigh in at the combine? Like 152 or something like that?
55, I think.
That's really small. So I'm interested to see how. Apparently he's like, I've seen like unreported numbers of him running 40s, and it's allegedly really fast. So I'm interested to see how that particular player translates to a much more physical conference. Could be great, and if he is a downfield big play threat, that's going to mesh really well with Drew Allar's strengths. He throws a pretty deep ball, I would say, but you're putting a lot of eggs in the transfer wide receiver basket when you're basically just kind of swapping two guys for two guys. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. And I mean, the elephant in the room is no more Tyler Warren, right? Like you can't say it's a blessing at all, because you lose a player like that, it's never good. But if you're looking for a silver lining, it at least forces you to be a little bit more creative with what you're doing offensively in the pass game. You don't just kind of have the one guy to throw to anymore. But I don't know. I don't think I'm necessarily worried about Penn State and their tight end room, because they're usually pretty good at producing those kind of guys.
Absolutely. And then you're going to rely on Liam Clifford, 286 yards last year, to kind of come in and take care of that room for you. As far as your experience, guys, having lost the other guys. So it's a big change. And we haven't even brought up the number one receiver on the team, who wasn't even a wide receiver, the tight end, in Tyler Warren. So when I looked up some of his stats, comparing his receiving production to the next two that we mentioned in Harrison Wallace, who's the second leading receiver on the team, Warren had 58 more receptions than him, and he had 513 more yards than Harrison Wallace. How do you even come close to replacing that production? I think you're going to need more of a multi-guy approach versus just a one do-it-all kind of guy. The one name that has popped up that Penn State fans are excited about is Luke Reynolds. And potentially he's the next stud tight end at Penn State. But to have to follow in those shoes of Tyler Warren those are some big shoes to fill. And I think they're going to have the multifaceted, multiple guys put you together like a 500-yard type season to get this offense where it kind of needs to be and expects to be. Brian, we have both mentioned Tyler Warren and Abdul Carter. So my next question to you was, who's the bigger, more impactful loss from the 2024 team on this 2025 team? Carter or Warren?
Oh, that's tough.
That was a great question, because I was testing that you could still hear me, because Riverside made me disappear for 5 seconds, and I didn't know what was going on there. I was hoping I was still live.
I don't know.
It's a tough one, right?
Yeah, I mean, oh.
Well, go back to 24. Take Carter off the defense and Warren off the offense. Which one would be more of an impact to that team last year?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's like because even in the like in the playoff when he got hurt, and then I know he played against Notre Dame. And I mean, he had one arm and was still a
God,
freak of nature.
what a beast.
But they still have guys on that defensive line or had guys on that defensive line who stepped in and played pretty well. If you took Tyler Warren off that offense, I mean, they probably lose to USC. They probably lose to Minnesota. They're probably not even in the playoff last year.
And even they did get in the playoff. You needed that playmaker to help you, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, their wide receivers didn't catch a pass against Notre Dame.
absolutely. You can't get any worse than that, right? I don't know. I think it's Warren. If it were me, I think I'd say Warren. If he's gone, I don't think Penn State's even a playoff team last year. And maybe we can cut this clip and ask Penn State fans their thoughts on it, whether you take one player off the team and who impacts you more. So we'll kind of find that out this year as both are gone.
I was going to say the bad thing is for them is they have neither now.
Yeah, absolutely. Does kind of going back to Allar, Pabula being gone, does that give you any concern that
No,
a faithful reliable there?
no, not at all.
Yeah.
You have one guy now. You don't have this. I get that some teams can deploy the package well, but you got your guy. Just let him be your guy. Let the entire offense run through him. Devise your offense entirely through him and his strengths. I mean, he's not a fantastic runner. He looks. I mean, he's big. He just looks kind of doofy when he runs, as most tall, large, freakishly large people do. But I mean, he still can run. He's just not as he doesn't look as shifty as Pabula did when he would do it.
Yep. The last guy I really had to note, I was reading Audrey Snyder of the Athletic/New York Times' report um, when we were talking about Knowles' scheme and the potential jack position to finally be utilized. To say is Max Granville. Max Granville, he's a second-year edge for Penn State, and again, potentially to be utilized in that jack role that Jim Knowles supposedly loves so much. He early enrolled, but he enrolled in summer of 2024, so right as preseason practice was going on last year. So he didn't get a ton of time to kind of settle in and be with this team. And when Carter got hurt, she noted that Granville filled in pretty well for Carter. His stats weren't anything special, but if you just do your job, right, that's the expectation to come in and fill for someone like that is just do your job, be in the right place, and that's all we really ask of you. So she had him listed as a potential possible defensive breakout player for Penn State in 2025. So if you guys are listening and you're not Penn State fans and not aware, keep an eye on the name of Max Granville. Ryan, do you have anything else to add about the big Penn State Nittany Lions before we move on?
No, let's go to Maryland.
Let's go to the Terps. Hey, remember that time you brought me a piece of pizza from Maryland?
Yeah, and Jellies.
That was pretty cool.
Good pizza place.
I've never had pizza that's flown on an airplane and brought to me. That was pretty cool. Ryan's a class act, guys. Class act. My stuff is split in two here. Where do you kind of want to start with Maryland, Ryan? You want to start on kind of the Locksley beef a little bit again? You know, they got quarterback problems. They got
Well, I thought like so.
work.
I mean, we've this has been one of those situations where I just don't feel very well plugged into that fan base and what they're kind of looking for. And I wouldn't even say you had an interesting back and forth because I don't, there was just people talking in our mentions about Maryland. And I thought a couple of people brought up some interesting points. And it was nice to get the Maryland fan perspective a little bit on what they're looking for into this season because we've discussed recently on this show that we think that Mike Locksley is probably number one in the Big Ten in terms of the hot seat rankings heading into 2025. And I just wanted to bring up this post from Terps Recruiting on Twitter that was in a Twitter thread that you were with today in regards to Locksley. You know, he's proven that he can win with a legit QB under center. Last year was a disappointment, but I still don't see the seat being hot at this point. Tons of roster turnover this year. This year will be about player development more than wins and losses, in my opinion. So that's an interesting take on the Maryland roster situation, I guess, this year. And I mean that makes sense, right? Like Billy Edwards is gone. He's at Wisconsin now. You lose Tai Felton to the draft. You lose Roman Hemby. He's transferring to Indiana, I think. So a lot of talent off that team, and I think that, I mean, if everyone's on the same page, like Locksley, the administration, the staff, like, hey, this is going to be a year where maybe the wins and losses aren't going to look great, but it's more about setting us up for being successful in 2026, particularly if freshman quarterback Malik Washington's able to win that job, then there's at least something to be excited about in Maryland this year as you watch that team kind of transition from older, more veteran to now younger guys trying to take the step into being more key contributors.
Yeah, and if you're looking at a guy that's on the hot seat though, like if we go a little bit opposite of Terp's recruiting here, and if he is on the hot seat, you feel like his job kind of resides on the performance of a transfer quarterback who's played in 5 games in 2 seasons, or a true freshman quarterback. That's a lot to kind of hedge your bets on, and so maybe that's what their point is, that he can buy an extra year or two because he just brought in Washington, is one of the top 4 stars for Maryland to be able to bring in here. They have good recruiting classes. I'm blanking on the young man's name. Zion. I'm blanking on his last name. And he was a good defensive end, talented.
Yeah, 5-star.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's for next year's class.
Yeah, so next year. But again, he's sitting there, and if you lose him, if you fire Locksley, does that cause something for you then to get into the transfer portal? The biggest thing, though, Ryan, it doesn't matter how well Justin Martin or Malik Washington play. What's vital to good quarterback play, Ryan? This is one of the most vital things that you need for quarterback play.
Do I look like I know the answer to that question?
Offensive line.
Oh,
you gotta have an offensive line. Ask the
Fair.
Cleveland Browns that.
That's fair.
Well, Maryland's offensive line was complete dung in 2024, man. They finished with a Big Ten worst 39.7% blown block rate. The run game also averaged a measly 3.59 yards per attempt. Now,
not good.
To try to help with that, you go to the transfer portal. That's what we can utilize in today's world. You added Akron transfer Javen James and an ESPN top 300 recruit in Jalen Gilchrist, and this was the other kind of pairing that they were alluding to when I was reading up on Maryland with Washington, is bringing in that talent. So offensively, I mean, no Felton, he's gone. Proctor's gone. Prather's gone. Good Lord. So you got to replenish there. Edwards put up a lot of stats for them, so it's a big turnover offensively. But just in general, they had 21 players go to the portal/graduation and draft, Ryan. They lost their big three, you already mentioned. Edwards went to Wisconsin. He threw for 2,881 yards last year, 15 TDs. Hemby, 607 rushing yards, which is still fairly impressive, given just the abysmal performance we just talked about their offensive line, in contributing 6 touchdowns. Felton, 1,124 yards, 9 TDs. Prather, second leading receiver on the team. And then you lose your stud DB in Dante Trader, who's now going to the draft. He's 59 tackles, second on the team. Ryan, I feel like that's a bit of a red flag there. If your corner is your second leading tackler at 59, your leading tackler, I believe, was only in the low 60s. That's pretty rough. And then, hopefully I don't botch this young man's name, but D-line Jordan Phillips and Tommy Akingbasote are now going to the draft. And we talked about Jordan Phillips before as a potential sleeper. So Maryland's got a lot to kind of plug in and replace this year for a coach who's potentially maybe outside more than inside Maryland folk. He's on the hot seat. Any further thoughts for you? I was going to pull up their schedule here, and we can kind of...
Oh, I got it right here. So that's it's not bad. It's not a bad schedule. It's not. I mean, it's kind of one of those. I feel like we had this conversation a lot last summer. It kind of depends on how you feel about some of these teams in the middle of the pack of the Big Ten. And I mean, I guess if we're looking at Maryland as kind of being at that bottom rung, maybe it's not super favorable. But your non-conference, you have Florida Atlantic, NIU, and Towson. So should be 3 wins. I could see 2-1. If they lose one of those games, man, this is kind of one of those all bets are off season. I mean, nobody wants to have to play Northern Illinois the second weekend of September because they are a powerhouse.
Well, it's the first weekend of September, though.
That's
So they're
true.
not
Second
gonna
game of
be-
the season. Well, that was, yeah, I don't remember how the schedule played out last year. Whatever. Second
It's
game,
a game
week
you
2.
erased from your memory.
You don't want to play. You don't want to have to play NIU in week 2, which was also Saturday, September 7th last year. So yeah, you don't. Yeah, fuck you, Clinton. Don't gaslight me.
What?
It's the same weekend.
So it's the second Saturday, but it's not the second Saturday in September.
First Saturday of September, week 2 of the season. God damn it, it's all the same. But their conference schedule splits up a little weird. So after your 3 non-con, you're at Camp Randall before a bye week, and then you have a 3-week run of Washington, Nebraska, and at UCLA before another bye, and then you finish the season with 5 consecutive games, hosting Indiana, at Rutgers, at Illinois, hosting Michigan, and then you're playing Michigan State at Ford Field in Detroit for some reason.
7-5.
That's generous, bud. There's no way. There's no way.
I mean, 1, 2, 3. I mean, I guess you got Wisconsin, Washington, Maryland, Nebraska. You think they're going to lose all 3 of those? They can't go 1 and 2 in there.
I mean, they could beat UCLA. That's a tough road trip, though. That's a tough road trip.
You get Washington at home. I think out of Maryland at Wisconsin, Washington at Maryland, and Nebraska at Maryland, I think they get at least one of those.
Well, the other thing that we have to consider too is they're hosting Washington, and there's a 50-50 chance that game is played at like 7:30 in the morning Washington time. So they might not even be awake for that game yet. Yes. But like,
4, 5.
it's just like I feel like this is a team that will have a pretty good idea on what way it's trending after September.
Yeah.
If they lose one of those non-conference games, man, it could be another 1-8 Big Ten season for them.
Fast.
Yes, that's
Because
you got
7 and I go back to 5 or 6.
If you gave me over under at 4.5, I think I'd take the under.
No faith.
No, well, because like you have a desperate Wisconsin team who they're gonna need.
On Thursday.
They need to win all of the puff games, all the toss-up games they can. That's the week after they play Alabama. So I don't know. Maybe they're just a shattered corpse at that point. But you have a Washington team that I personally think is going to take a big step forward in year 2 of Jed Fish. You have a Nebraska team that seems on the upswing. UCLA is, again, one of those teams that at least from my perspective, they exceeded expectations last year. I'm interested to see what they do in year 2 of Deshaun Foster. You have Indiana, who should be a tough out again. You have Rutgers, who always seems to play well-ish in November under Shianu. You're at Illinois, a team that, again, we've talked about is getting early preseason top 10, top 15 buzz. You have a Michigan team that, if Bryce Underwood lives up to the hype, should be firing on all cylinders by the end of November. And then, who knows what Michigan State's going to be at the end of the season. So those are all, like, I don't look at that Big Ten schedule and say, like, it's a manageable Big Ten schedule. But when you're a team that's in Maryland's position, I look at all those games and say, I would not feel comfortable picking Maryland straight up to win any of these games. That doesn't mean I think they're going to go 0-9 in Big Ten play, but I mean, just looking at what I know about these teams right now, based on how they performed last season, I wouldn't pick Maryland to win any of those right off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, I certainly think it's tough. I think what's nice for you is drawing Michigan at home, drawing Indiana at home. I mean, I guess it depends on what Michigan team we get. And again, a couple weeks from now, we'll get into the spring preview. But all the talent that they lost. But if Underwood is playing and he's everything he's supposed to be, you're corrected. I don't see them being able to beat them. He's going to also be like Penn State needs some help from wide receivers. I don't know. Maybe I made my assumption too fast on the 7 there. That was a bold prediction.
Yeah, I'm holding you to that. I'm writing it down right now. Clinton said 7-5.
Don't hang me out on that one. But you're right. If you drop Florida Atlantic, Northern Illinois, or God forbid, Towson.
Oh man, if they lose to Towson, that might be the end of the Mike Locksley era.
Yeah, I think you could be canned. But if you can clip Wisconsin, that's at Wisconsin though. That feels like a peacock type game to me.
Yeah.
getting that game on a 7:30, and you don't want to be in that environment. I guess it really depends. If Washington's the quarterback, how talented is he? How much is he rattled by going into Wisconsin? By going to, well, we all know the Rose Bowl with UCLA is so daunting. Going to Champaign, Illinois will be a challenge. And even at Ford Field, I mean, Michigan State fans will show out for that. You probably get some Lions fans in there. It's going to be pro Michigan State. And again, depending on what Aiden Childs becomes this year, yeah, it's going to be an interesting season. And you see why Terps recruiting was Terps recruiting, right? That mentioned
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
in the post is this year maybe necessarily is not more about wins and losses. It's development and get ready for. It feels so bad saying this though, right? Like, and maybe that's me. I mean, you're a fan of Notre Dame too. Like we're fans of teams that the expectation is to win every year, and not the years to focus on development, right? And not wins and losses. Everything in Columbus is about wins and losses. That's how your season's defined. Nobody walks in and just says, "Well, shit, we won the Natty last year. We're just here to develop this year, and then we'll get back on the train in 2026." So that's something that I'm learning as we go through this podcast, and I believe it was Scott Ritchie who told us last year with Illinois. Essentially, now again they exceeded expectations, but coming into that season, it didn't seem like anybody outside of that locker room had any positive vibes that they were going to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And look at them. Was it
Had a great year.
9-3?
They had a great year.
Fantastic year, and you knocked off South Carolina in the bowl game, and now you're getting top 15 hype. So who knows? Maybe the path for Maryland is not as bleak as we think. Maybe they spark a little bit at the end of the season and get some momentum heading into 2026. The other thing here, they did sign, like I mentioned, the top 25 recruiting class. We mentioned Washington and Gilchrist, but they did bring in 3 other 4-stars, Ryan. They brought in safety Messiah Delhomme, defensive lineman Bryce Jenkins, and athlete Zamir Smith. So, again, Locksley doing a great job on the recruiting trail and his staff bringing players in here. Ryan, do you have any other further thoughts on the Maryland Terrapins?
No, man, I think that pretty well covers it. I think.
As we said, Maryland fans, if you do decide to tune into this, we'd love to have some more interaction with you guys. Let us know about your team, your expectations. Do you follow along the line of Terps recruiting and that this year is more about development, not so much wins and losses? Or are you in the other side of it and you want to see the wins as well as the development to help this team get back on track? Definitely to bowl eligibility, I think, is the first goal.
Mm-hmm.
To be 8-9 wins. We know September Maryland is a thing. Wasn't last year, but you got a good shot with it this year. So we are looking at now progressing to our Thursday episode, which is going to be potentially, first talking with our guy Sammy Jacobs. We have it slated as Indiana, Wisconsin. He cannot do Thursday, but he's going to check the schedule, and if he can do Monday, we are going to swap most likely Northwestern to fill in with Wisconsin, and then keep Ohio State, Indiana for Monday, because we are potentially waiting on hearing back from an Ohio State writer as well, and I've already promised Monday, so I can't remove that. So if Indiana is viable for next Monday, we will have Northwestern, Wisconsin on with Thursday. I keep wanting to say Wednesday, I don't know why. Or we will have Indiana, Wisconsin. So we will look forward to chatting about those guys. Obviously, just talking Wisconsin here, rather bleak last season. Another daunting schedule coming this year. What to expect with the new OC that we've already talked about, new quarterback again. And Indiana coming off a season that was amazing, Ryan. I don't think it's anything short of amazing. And to follow that up, what does Signetti have up his sleeve for another encore? And if Thursday ends up getting swapped, Indiana to Northwestern, David Braun, can you just get Northwestern back on track? Bowl eligibility, Preston Stone, those types of pieces there to talk about Northwestern. And guys, again, give us a check out on YouTube, ITP CFB. Hit like and press subscribe so you never miss a minute of the action. Give us a follow on Instagram or X/Twitter, ITP CFB. And again, hit that follow on your preferred podcast platform, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you are. You can find us there and leave us a review. whether it be a comment, whether it be a 4 or 5 star, it just helps us grow the show. We would greatly appreciate that.
Everyone, thank you for tuning in once again. We will see you back on Thursday for more spring football talk. Enjoy your week.
Deuces.
Easy peasy.
I've been enjoying reading about this shit at least. It feels